Okay, so good morning, everyone. So let's begin today's lecture. Okay. So in the last lecture, right, just before the test, which means on Wednesday's lecture, we had just started this topic on context-free grammars. So as I said on in Wednesday's lecture as well, right? So we have finished the first part of the course, which was on regular languages, and now we have moved to the second part of the course, where we look at another class of languages, right? So these are context-free languages, right? So we saw that regular languages have certain limitations, right? So many important languages, such as this language of balanced parentheses, right? Which is part of any programming language syntax. So such a language is not regular, right? So if we want to, so we want to consider language classes which, or rather, so we want language classes which also includes languages like that, right? So the language of balanced parentheses. So towards that end, we had defined this notion of a context-free language, right? So we have not yet formally defined what's a context-free language. So we said that, okay, languages like this language of balanced parentheses have this property that they can be recursively formulated, right? So in the sense that you can basically construct strings recursively, right? So if you have a string, right, that's already in that language, then so for example, let's take 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n, right? So if you have a string that's already in this language, then I can add a 1, I can add a 0 at the beginning, and I can add a 1 at the end. So if w is in the language, then 0 w1 is also in the language, right? So it's based on this observation, right, that we came up with this methodology, right, or this representation of these languages in the form of context-free grammars, right? So let's briefly revise, right, what was a context-free grammar. Sorry. So formally, a context-free grammar is given by 4 tuple. So there is a set of terminals, a set of non-terminals, a set of production rules, and a special non-terminal which is called start, which is called the start variable, right, or the start symbol. Okay. So this formalism basically is a way of expressing this, or is a way of formally defining, right, this notion of recursively generating strings of the language, right? So we say that we are going to represent sets of strings, which is a language, by variables. Right? So these variables will be non-terminals, right? And so this is n, right? So n is the set of non-terminals or the variables, right? Each of which is going to represent a language, and the set of terminals are simply the alphabet itself. And symbols of the alphabet is the set of terminals, and this is simply the symbols, right, from which the language, of which the strings of the language are being defined on, right? And this production rule, right? So this production rule basically formalizes our notion of how to recursively express one string in terms of other string. It's one string in the language in terms of other strings, right? So a production rule is written is written in this form, right? So there is a variable, then there is an arrow, and then a string of variables and terminals, right? So the idea, right, is that whatever is there on the right hand side, which we also call the body of the production, right? So whatever strings are there on the body of the production, they are also present in the head of the production, right? So whatever strings that I can generate from the body of the production, those particular strings are also associated with the variable which is in the head of the production, right, or the left hand side of the production. So given a production of this form, A generates alpha. Right? So A is called the head and alpha is called the body. So alpha is going to be a string of both variables and terminals, right? So we know that each variable represents a set of strings, right? So whatever strings that you can generate from alpha, right, by basically replacing the variables in alpha with their set of strings, right, all of those strings, right, are going to be present or are going to be represented by the variable A. Okay. So that's the general idea of how to think about context free grammar. So and we have this special start symbol s. Right? So the language of the context free grammar is the language of s. It's the language that's represented by the symbol s. Okay. And we also saw this example, right, of how to generate or how to construct the context free grammar for expressions in a programming language. So I won't go through this example again. So are there any questions regarding whatever we covered on Wednesday's lecture? Okay, how will we generate? So Vinit is asking, how will we generate whole numbers? So by whole numbers, I assume you mean both negative and positive integers. Zero, right? So I thought, yeah, so I thought that we had covered this, right? So in fact, like this is the grammar that's shown in the slide, right? It's actually generating zero and every other positive integer, right? So we use this symbol C, right, in order to so the non-terminal C, right, expresses the set of whole numbers, right, and so it can either be zero or it can be a non-zero value, right. If it is non-zero, then so D is for zero, right. So the symbol the non-terminal D expresses the string zero, and every other non-zero number, right, is expressed by this set of the sequence of non-terminals fr, right, where f is the first number and r is the rest of the numbers. Right? The first digit and r is the rest of the digits. So the first digit cannot be zero, right? And the rest of the digits are unconstrained. So what will be the start state? No. Uh, so this particular set of whole numbers, right? So we are not generating that particular language, right? So this language is sort of a part of this bigger language, right? Which is the language of expressions in a programming language. Right? So so C basically generates all the whole numbers, right? And then the C is part of E, right? So for example, the very first production rule, right, at the very top says that E can generate either I or C, right? So given an expression, right? So an expression, right, would basically involve expressions in using identifiers and expression using numbers. Right? So that's how. So the C is a part of it, and E is the start symbol of this particular grammar. So if you were to, for example, just so if you wanted to write a CFG only for expressing the whole numbers, right, then C would be the start symbol. But anyway, even that language is regular, right? So you can even write have a regular expression, or you can have a DFA as well for that particular language. Okay. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So then let's move forward. Okay. So we have seen one way uh, of trying to express, right? How is it that the strings of the CFG are represented by the CFG itself, right? So we said that so this was based on the production rules, right? So we said that every string that's present in the body of a production rule, or every string that can be represented by the body of the production rule, is also represented by the variable in the head of the production rule, right? So that's going from body to head, but there's also another way in which we can use you can use this production rules, right? So that's so in this uh, so those are called derivations, right? So here we go from the head to the body, right? So we say that okay, in order to find out what are the strings that are represented by the head of a production rule, I am going to basically replace the head, right, with the entire body of the production rule, and then I'm going to keep on doing that recursively, right? So I'm going to then replace the variables which are present in the body of the production rule with their corresponding with their corresponding production rules, right? So I keep on doing that until I basically get rid of all the non-terminals. I'm just left with with a terminal string. So this entire process is called a derivation. So we basically derive the strings in the language of a CFG by starting with the start symbol of the CFG and then repeatedly replacing some variable uh, A, right, by the right hand side of one of its productions. Okay, so we do this for the start symbol S itself. Right? So we basically begin with just S. Okay, and then if in the production rule, right, we have something like S generates some alpha A beta, right? Then what we are going to do, right, is that we are first going to replace S with the right hand side. So we have this production rule. So I'm going to replace S with the right hand side. So I'll get alpha A beta, okay? And then for A, right, I may have some other production rule. Okay? So whatever production rule I have, right, so I'm then going to replace this A uh, with the right hand side of its production rule, right? So this particular thing is going to go here. Okay, so let's say that this was gamma, okay? Then this is going to be alpha, gamma, beta, and so on. Right? So I will keep on doing this until I get rid of all the non-terminals. Okay? Uh, so let's formally define this. Right? So we introduce this new symbol for derivation, right? So which is this double arrow. So note that single arrow represents a production rule, right? While double arrow represents uh, a derivation. Right? So it's not part of the context tree grammar itself. Right? So it's another operation that we have defined using the production rules of the context tree grammar. Right? So this operation is defined as follows. Right? So if you have alpha A beta, then from that particular string you can derive alpha gamma beta if A generates gamma is a production. So if A generates gamma is a production rule of the context tree grammar. And if you have a string of the form alpha A beta, then you can derive the string alpha gamma beta from that particular string. So this is a this is the simple definition of a derivation. Okay, so let's try to see an example. Right, so we have seen this grammar which generates strings of the form 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n. Right? So equal numbers of zeros and ones. So here is here is an example, right, of a sequence of derivations which helps us to basically obtain a string in the language, obtain a string in the language corresponding to this grammar, beginning from the start symbol. Right. So beginning from the start symbol, I first apply the production rule s generates 0 as 1. Right. So I will get this particular string which is 0 as 1 itself. And then again in this string 0 as 1, I apply the same production rule. So I get so this s is replaced by this 0 as 1, and the 0 and 1 remain the same. Okay. So that's why I get this string, right, which is the 0 0 s 1 1, and then I do it one more time, right? So again this s, so I replace this s with this, right? And here I replace this s with this particular string. Okay. So this so the 0 0 and the 1 1 at the beginning and the end remain the same, while I've just replaced s with 0 as 1 again. And then I applied the production rule S generates epsilon. So I applied S generates epsilon, and that gives me a string which doesn't have any non-terminals. Right? So all the symbols in this string are terminals, right? Or they are symbols of the alphabet, and that's why I end up with a string that's present in the language of this context tree grammar. So this is how you can use the production rules. Right? So we use the production rules from the head towards the body. Right? uh, and we can then apply a sequence of derivations in order to obtain the strings which only consists of terminals, right, or the alphabet symbols, and this string would be in the language of the contextual grammar. Okay. So let's define another notation, which is this iterated derivation. Right? So we have defined this notation, right, this double arrow notation, and then use this double arrow star notation, which means 0 or more derivation steps. So this is defined inductively. So we say that uh, alpha derives alpha for any string alpha. Okay. So this is a derivation with just 0 steps. Okay. And if alpha derives beta and if beta derives gamma, then alpha also derives gamma. Okay. So this is the inductive step. Okay. So in this way, right, we can basically collect together any number of derivation steps, right? And we can say how, right, eventually you would get a string from another string. Okay? How eventually you can derive one string from another string. So again, let's look at an example of iterated derivation, right? So consider the same grammar, right? S generates epsilon and S generates 0 as 1. So this was again the grammar for the language 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n. And we have seen this particular sequence of derivations, right? So beginning from the start symbol S, right? I can repeatedly apply this production S generates 0 as 1. And then I will eventually get the string 0, 0, 0 and 1, 1, 1. So now I can use the definition of iterated. So I can use the definition of an iterated derivation. So so I can apply. So I can say that S, right, can generate 0 as 1. Okay? Uh, and this is because S, right? So I can apply the base case, right? So the base case says that S can generate S, and since I know that S can generate 0 as 1, right, or S can derive 0 as 1, and that's why S can also derive 0 as 1 with the notion of this with the notion of this iterated derivation, right? And since from 0 as 1 I can get 0, 0 as 1, 1, that means that S can also derive 0, 0 as sorry 0, 0 as 1, 1. Okay. And then since from 0, 0 as 1, 1 I can derive this particular string, so I can also say that S can derive 0, 0, 0 as 1, 1, 1. And finally, I can say that S can derive 0, 0, 0 and 1, 1, 1. Okay. And this is what so this is what we eventually want to arrive at, right? So we want to find out all the terminal strings that can be generated or that can be derived from the start symbol S using any number of steps, right? So in any number of steps, we want to find out what are the set of terminal strings that can be derived, and they can be expressed using this notion of iterated derivation. Okay, so yeah. So are there any questions so far regarding the notion of derivations or iterated derivation? Okay. Okay, Vinit is asking something. So derivation is only applicable to non-terminals. Yes, so I mean, from a terminal, right? If you have a terminal string, then remember that production rule, right? So you can't apply a production rule to a terminal string. Okay. So a production rule P, right, was of this form, right? So it was N cross N union sigma star. So the left-hand side of a production rule is always a single non-terminal. Okay. Uh, and that's why so if you have a string which doesn't have any non-terminals in it, then you can't apply any of the production rules. So if you have a terminal string, then you can't apply any of the production rules, and that's why there will be no derivation. There will be no further derivation that's possible. Okay. Okay. Any more questions? Okay, so Vineet is asking, can we apply this notion of derivation to 0 S1? Yes, so we can do that, right? So since there is a non-terminal here, right? So since there is a non-terminal, I can use any of the production rules which have S on its left-hand side. Uh, so you can, yeah, so you can apply those production rules, and then you can uh, get the corresponding derivation from that string as well. So so this iterated derivation, right? The left hand side of an iterated derivation can basically be any string, right? Which has at least one non-terminal inside it. Okay. Also notice that, I mean, there is also the base case, right? So even if you have, let's say, 0, 1, right, which doesn't have any non-terminal inside it, it is certainly the case that 0, 1 can derive 0, right? Because any string can derive itself. So this particular base case, right, is always there, but you can't derive any more strings from a string which only consists of terminals. So you need a non-terminal, at least one non-terminal there. Okay. Okay, so let's look at this notion of a sentential form. So any string of variables and or terminals. So variable is a non-terminal, right? So any string of variables, so any string of non-terminals and terminals, which can be derived from the start symbol, right, is called a sentential derivation. Okay? So which means that if you begin from the start symbol, right, and by a sequence of derivations, right, using any number of derivations, if you arrive to some string alpha, right, where alpha can have non-terminals or terminals inside it, right? So alpha is any string which can have either a terminal or a non-terminal inside it. Then this alpha is called a sentential form. So alpha is a sentential form. If you're on leaf, you can derive alpha from the start symbol s, right? Only the start symbol s, using any number of derivations. Okay. And so using this concept of iterated derivations and a sentential form, right, we can now formally define what is the language of a grammar, right? So far we have been informally saying, right, that what is the language that is generated by grammar, but now we can formally define. So the definition is very straightforward, right? So if you have given a grammar G, okay, which is given by this four tuple n sigma p and s, right? N is the set of non-terminals, sigma is the set of terminals of the alphabet, p is the set of production rules, and s is the start symbol, right? Which is a particular variable in n. Okay. So if this is a context-free grammar, then the language of this context-free grammar is given by the set of all words, right, in sigma star, which you can derive from S. So if S generates W, right, so if you can derive W from S using any number of steps, where W doesn't contain any non-terminal, right? So W is in sigma star, which means that all of the symbols in W, right, are present in sigma. So it's a terminal string. Then this W will be present in the language of G, right? In fact, the language of G is exactly all of those set of strings which you can generate or which you can derive from the start symbol S. So, for example, right? So if we had if you look at this grammar, right, which you have seen before, where this grammar just has one start symbol S. So rather, this grammar just has one non-terminal, uh, which is the start symbol S, right? And there are two production rules: S generates S generates epsilon, and S generates 0 as 1. Then the language of this grammar, right, is nothing but 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n. So all the strings that you can derive using the start symbol S, all the terminal strings that you can derive from the start symbol S will have this form: 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n. And in fact, any string, right, of the form 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n can be derived from the start symbol S. So that's why this is the language of this particular grammar. Okay. So any questions regarding sentential form and language of the grammar? Okay. So now that we have defined the language of a grammar, right, we can also now formally define what is a context-free language. So any language that is defined by some context-free grammar is called a context-free language. So if you are given some language, right, and if you can construct a context-free grammar such that the language of this context-free grammar is the same language, then this particular language will be called context-free language, right, or a CFL. So a language that is defined by some context-free grammar is called a context-free language. So so again, right? So this language class, this class of context-free uh, languages, right? So this particular class is bigger than the class of regular languages, because as we just saw in this last example, right, 0 to the power and 1 to the power n, that there are context-free languages that are not regular languages. However, there are also other languages which are not context-free languages as well. Right? So there are languages which are not context-free languages, just like there are languages which are not regular languages. So we will see later on in the course other ways of representing languages which are not context-free languages. Right? But for the moment, let's focus only on the context-free languages. Okay. Let's also define two more notions of derivations, which are this leftmost derivation and rightmost derivation. So as we have seen, right, that in a derivation, right, so a derivation allows us to replace any of the variables in a string. So we said that if you have some particular form, right, let's say alpha a beta, okay, where this alpha and beta, right, are just strings consisting of terminals and non-terminals, and this a is a particular non-terminal. Then if you have a production rule of the form A generates gamma, right, then I can derive alpha, gamma, and beta from this alpha A beta. So this is the notion of a single derivation. Right? So if you notice, right, so you can, so this alpha itself, right, can have any number of non-terminals inside it, and this beta also can have any number of non-terminals inside it. Right? So a derivation basically allows us to pick any of the non-terminal, right, any of the variable that is present right, in a string, right, and then apply the production rule for that particular non-terminal in order to derive the next string. Okay. So in the case of leftmost and rightmost derivations, right, we will enforce some constraints on which variable to pick, right, or which non-terminal to pick, uh, and which particular non-terminal to pick, and to apply the production rule for that particular non-terminal. So the main disadvantage of using a derivation, right, is that this leads to many different derivations of the same string. So since you can pick any of the non-terminal that is present in a given string, right, there are many choices here, right? So this results in different derivations of the same string. Okay, so that's why we enforce constraints, right? So we say that the two constraints that we are going to enforce are picking the leftmost variable and picking the rightmost variable. Okay. So by picking the leftmost or the rightmost variables, we will just so this doesn't affect the set of derivations. Right? That the set of strings that can be derived remains the same, but the set of derivations reduces. Right? So we'll only get one derivation for a given string. Okay. So by forcing the leftmost variable or the rightmost variable to be replaced, we basically avoid these different derivations of the same string. Right? So we are only interested in one derivation of the string, and that can be systematically arrived at, right, by simply replacing or by simply picking the leftmost or the rightmost variable. So let's make this notion more formal by formally defining, right, what is the leftmost derivation. Okay. So the leftmost derivation, as the name implies, right, always picks the leftmost variable, right, or the leftmost non-terminal in any sentential form. Okay. So if you have this form, right, let's say W, A, and alpha, right, where this W, right, is a string, is a terminal string, right? So W is present in sigma star. So W doesn't contain any variables inside it. Or W doesn't contain any non-terminals inside it. Okay? So, and then you have this particular non-terminal A. Right? So WA alpha, in this particular form, the leftmost non-terminal is therefore A. So I'm going to then replace A with its production rule. Right? So if you have a production rule of the form A generates beta, right? Then from WA alpha, using a leftmost derivation, I will get the particular string W, beta, and alpha, where I've just replaced A with beta. So this is a leftmost derivation. Right? So in a normal derivation, right, I would not be forced to pick A. Right? So I can pick any non-terminal, right, that may be present, say, in alpha as well. Right? But in a leftmost derivation, I'm forced to pick the leftmost non-terminal in the string. And similarly, I can also have this notion of iterated leftmost derivation, right? Where at every particular derivation, I will pick the leftmost non-terminal. Right? So I say that uh, alpha derives beta, right? Using a sequence of leftmost derivations. Right? If alpha becomes beta by a sequence of 0 or more leftmost derivation steps. Okay, so let's look at an example in order to illustrate this concept of leftmost derivations. Right? So for this, we will focus on this balanced parenthesis grammar. Okay, so we have seen this balanced parenthesis grammar as part of the grammar for expressions in a programming language that we defined in Wednesday's lecture. Right? So let's take so let's only focus on the grammar for balanced parentheses, right? So this grammar has just one non-terminal or one variable, which is this variable s, which is also the start symbol of the grammar. Okay, and there are three production rules, right? So s generates ss, or s generates this open bracket s close bracket, and s generates epsilon. Okay, so this is a context-free grammar, right? And if you look at any strings that will be generated by this grammar, okay, then these strings will have balanced parentheses, since that the number of opening braces will be equal to the number of closing braces, and the nesting will also be proper. So let's consider this particular string. Okay, so notice that this string, right, does have balanced parentheses, right? So in the sense that the number of opening braces are equal to the number of closing brackets, right? The number of opening brackets are equal to the number of closing brackets, and the nesting is also proper. So we can derive this string from the start symbol s, right? But let's use the leftmost derivation. Right? So let's derive this string from s only using leftmost derivations. So we begin with the start symbol s. Okay. So which production rule can I apply? Right. So here there is just one particular non-terminal, right, which is s. So s is the leftmost non-terminal, and therefore I can apply any of the production rules for s. So there are three production rules. So which production rule should I apply if I want to generate this string, or if I want to derive this string? Okay, Kostab is saying SS. Okay, so let's apply SS. Okay. So now, right, there are two symbols here. Okay, or there are two non-terminals here. So in a leftmost derivation, I'm forced to pick the leftmost non-terminal, which is S in this case. So I have to pick this particular S. So which production rule can I apply next? Okay. So Kostab is again saying that apply this production rule. So which is this opening bracket, S closing bracket, and then this other S remains the same, right? So I basically replace this first S, right, with this particular production rule, right? S generates opening brackets, S closing brackets. The other one remains the same. Okay, so now again I'm forced to pick the leftmost non-terminal. So here the leftmost non-terminal is this guy again. So again I need to apply another production rule. Okay. So I can apply the same production rule again. And then S. Okay. So again, all I've done, right, is that I've replaced this S, right, with this string. And the rest of the symbols have remained the same. Okay, so the rest of the string has remained the same. But I have used again this production rule that S generates opening bracket, S closing bracket. And now, right, again, in a leftmost derivation, so far I have followed the rule of a leftmost derivation. So in a leftmost derivation, I'm again forced to pick this S. Okay. So now which production rule can I apply? Yeah, so when saying S generates epsilon. Okay. So if I apply S nets epsilon, then epsilon vanishes away. So I'm left with the string, this one, and then S. And now, right, so in this string, so here is, so this particular substring, right, only consists of terminal symbols. So again, there is only, so the leftmost non-terminal in this string is again this S. Right? So again, I can apply the opening bracket, closing bracket rule, okay, production rule. So I'll get this. And then from here, right, I can again apply the epsilon rule. So I'll get this string. Yes. Okay. So so using a sequence of leftmost derivations, I can derive this string, okay, from the start symbol S. Okay, so Vinith is, yeah, that's the sequence of derivations. That's correct. Okay. So I can also use this notion of iterated derivations or iterated leftmost derivations now to say that using a sequence of leftmost derivations, I can derive this string beginning from S. Uh, so remember that for a string to be present in the language of the grammar, there must exist some derivation of that string beginning from the start symbol. Right? So it need not necessarily be the leftmost derivation. And in fact, this string, right, has multiple derivations. So you can, so instead of picking the leftmost non-terminal, right? So in the very first step, so in this step, right, instead of picking the leftmost non-terminal, I could have as well picked the right non-terminal, right? Uh, and uh, and again, right, I can sort of pick whichever symbol that's present in the resulting string as well. So which means that the same string, right, is going to have multiple derivations, but that doesn't really matter, right? So as long as we can find one derivation of a string, we can determine whether or not the string is present in the language or not. And this leftmost derivations basically allows us to do this systematically by always picking the leftmost. Okay, so Vinith is asking that is this a unique derivation using leftmost derivation? Okay, so if you always pick the leftmost symbol, right? Uh, I mean, so there could be other derivations as well, right? So it could be possible that you can derive the same string using other production rules, right? So there could be some redundant variables that may be present, right? So in which case you could also derive the same string using other production rules by always picking the leftmost symbol. So it's not the case that there's a unique derivation using leftmost derivation, right? But so in fact, this notion of unique derivations, right? We will revisit it again, right? When we look at ambiguous grammars, right? So this question will be answered in more detail later on. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So just like just like leftmost, we can also have rightmost derivations. So here I'm always going to pick the symbol or I'm always going to pick the non-terminal that is on the right hand. That is the rightmost non-terminal in the string. So if you have a string of the form alpha AW, right, where this W is only a string of terminals, it's only a string of the symbols of the alphabet, which means that A is going to be the rightmost non-terminal of this particular string alpha AW. So then I'm going to apply the production rule for A. Right? So if this production rule of the form A generates beta, then I'm going to replace A with beta, and using a rightmost derivation, I will get alpha beta W. So in a rightmost derivation, I always pick the rightmost non-terminal. And just like, and similarly, we can also define this notion of iterated rightmost derivations, right? Where at every step of the derivation, I pick the rightmost non-terminal. So I pick the production rule for the rightmost non-terminal. Okay. So, so let's again revisit this grammar. Okay, so so we saw this grammar before for this language 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. So this grammar just has one non-terminal, which is s, right, and two production rules, which are s generates 0 as 1 and s generates epsilon. Okay. Now we said that the language of this grammar is exactly 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. Right? But how to formally prove, right, that this is the language of the grammar? Okay, so using this example, right, so we will illustrate how to formally reason about the language of a CFG. Right? And how to prove that this is exactly the language of the CFG. Okay. Uh, so let's prove this, right? So hopefully, right. So this proof will also give you some idea, right, of how to actually uh, of how to construct these grammars, right, given a particular language. Uh, so as I said, right, so we have two sides here. Right? So on the left hand side, we have the language of the grammar, which is the set of all strings that can be generated, that can be derived using the production rules of the grammar, right, beginning from the start symbol s. And on the right hand side, I have this particular language of this form, right, 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. So we'll show that. So in order to show that two sets are equal, we have to show that one is the subset of the other, and vice versa. Right? So that's exactly what we'll show. Uh, let's first prove that this language of the grammar, right, is a subset of 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, where n is greater than or equal to 0. So this is saying that any string that can be derived, right, from beginning. So the language of the grammar is the set of all strings that can be derived from the start symbol. Okay, so this statement is saying that any string that can be derived from the start symbol s of the grammar must have this form 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n. So how can we formally prove this? Uh, any suggestions? Yeah, so that's exactly what we are saying, right? So we are going to prove both the directions, but I'm just talking about this particular direction. So I want to say that so if W belongs to L of G, and this implies that W is of the form 0 to the power n and 1 to the power n, where n is greater than or equal to 0. This is what I want to show. Okay, so Vinith is saying use induction, and Kaustav is saying that if x is accepted, then x is of the form 0 y1, where y is accepted. Okay, so induction. Yeah, so okay, so these are sort of informal answers, right? But you are both right, right? So we have to use induction, right? And I think what Kaustav is saying uh, is sort of hinting, right, that what is it that we should use induction on? Right? So we have to use induction on the number of steps of the derivation. Okay, so we know that if W is present in L of G, then there exists some derivation of the form from the start symbol S. Right? So S would derive W. So we'll use induction on the number of steps of the derivation. Okay, but so is this going to be sufficient? Right? So what should be the inductive hypothesis? Right? So should this be the inductive hypothesis, or do we need to do something more? Right? Do we need to say something more here? So since we are using induction on the number of steps in the derivation, right? In the inductive step, right? I would say that okay, if after some n steps, right, I derive some particular string, right, then after n plus 1 steps, I would derive a string in the same thing. Yeah. So Vinith is saying it should be of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the s, and 1 to the power n. Yeah. So it's correct. Right? So let's write down the inductive step properly. Right? So let's write down the inductive hypothesis properly. Right? So inductive hypothesis is that if uh, so if S derives W in any number of steps, okay, then W is either equal to 0 to the power n s 1 to the power n, where n is greater than or equal to 0, or w is equal to 0 to the power n 1 to the power n. So this is going to be our inductive hypothesis, right? So this is what we are actually going to prove, okay? And if we can prove this, right, then this would imply that any string w, right, that's present in the language. So we know that a string is present in the language only if it can be derived from the start symbol s, and if it doesn't have any non-terminals. It's a terminal string. So in this statement, the only terminal string is of the form 0 to the power n 1 to the power n, and that's why any string that you can derive, any terminal string that you can derive from s will be of the form 0 to the power n w to the power n, okay, 1 to the power n. So what I'm saying is that this particular thing, right, basically implies that this language of G is a subset of 0 to the power n 1 to the power n, where n is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so we are going to prove this. Okay. And again, right, so we'll use induction on the number of steps in the derivation. So let's consider the base case. So the base case is 0 steps. So in 0 steps, I can get S to S, right? So uh, yeah, so this is all I can do, right, in 0 steps. Okay. And this one clearly belongs to, and this one is of the form 0 to the power n s 1 to the power n, where n is equal to 0. Okay. So therefore the statement holds. So now let's consider the inductive case. Okay. So let's say that in some n number of steps, right, I have derived this string w. Okay. And now I'm considering a string that I can derive in the n plus 1th step. So now the inductive hypothesis, right, would say that any string that you derive, so this w will be of the form 0 to the power n s 1 to the power n. So this means that so by inductive hypothesis, we can say that s in n steps is going to derive a string of the form 0 to the power n s 1 to the power n. Okay. Uh, Now, so the production rule, right? So there are only two production rules. So we have S generates epsilon, and then we have S generates 0 as 1. Uh, so if I take the next step in the derivation, right? So there are two possibilities here. Okay. So in n plus 1 steps, I can get 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, right? Or in n plus 1 steps, I can generate 0 to the power n plus 1 s 1 to the power n plus 1. Right? Sorry. Okay. But both of these forms, right, obey the consequent, right? So both of these forms basically obey the form that we are actually looking for. So this means that the inductive case is also satisfied, and this completes the proof, right? That if you can derive the string w from the start symbol s, then w must be of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. Okay. So any questions regarding this proof? Okay. So now let's also prove the other direction. Uh, yeah. So the other direction that we want to show, right, uh, is that if w is of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, then this implies that there must exist a sequence of derivations, right, from s to w, right? So s must belong to, rather w must belong to the language of this particular grammar. So which means that there must be a sequence of derivations from s. Uh, so how do I actually show this? Any suggestions? So what should I use? So again, I have to use induction, right? But what should I use induction on? Okay, so when it is saying induction on the length of W. Okay. Okay, so let's use induction on the length of W. Okay. So is this going to be sufficient, or so do I directly prove this, or do I need to strengthen? Okay. Now when it is saying induction on the number of zeros. Okay. So do we need induction on the number of zeros, uh, or induction on the length is fine? So let's actually do this induction on length of W. Let's see if we run into any problem. Okay. So let's consider the base case. Okay. So the base case is that we consider the string of length 0. Okay. So there is only one string of length 0, which is epsilon, and epsilon is present in the language. Okay. So does there exist a product? So does there exist a derivation beginning from the start symbol s? So there does exist a derivation. Right? So S can derive epsilon. Right? I can use the production rule S generates epsilon. So, so the base case is done. Done, right? So the empty string can be derived from S, and therefore it's present in the language of the CFG. So now let's do the inductive case. So I'm going to structure the inductive case in this fashion. Right? So I'm going to say that for all strings, right, of length less than, let's say, some n. Okay. For all strings of length less than n, which are present, which are of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, they are present in the language. Uh, and then they are present in the language of the grammar. And then I'm going to consider a string of length n. So, let's take this particular string. Right? So let's say W is of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. Okay. So we'll say that for all strings, so this is the inductive hypothesis. So the inductive hypothesis says that for all strings of length less than length of W, there is a derivation. So for all strings, let's call it W prime of length less than W, we can derive this W prime from S. So this is the inductive hypothesis. Right? So here we are actually using strong induction. Right? So we are saying that for all strings, right, W prime of length less than this length of W, there exists a derivation beginning from the start symbol S. Right? And now we have to show that for this string of length, for the string W itself, right, there also exists a derivation. Okay. So how can I now show this, right? So how can I show that this particular string W also is going to have a derivation? See here, since we already considered the case where uh, the length of the string is not zero, right? So this means that n is going to be strictly greater than zero. Okay? So I can say that so I can say I can write this string W as follows, right? So the string W, which is 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, is the same as 0 to the power n minus 1, 1 to the power n minus 1, and then 1. Okay, because n is strictly greater than 0. Okay. So now, right, if I have this particular string, okay, if I write this 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n in this fashion, can I now have a derivation for this string? Okay, so let me just do this, right? So let's say that beginning from S, right, I apply this production rule 0s1. Okay. So now, right, I know that for all strings W prime of length less than this length of W, there exists a derivation from S itself, right? Which which through which I can derive this W prime. Okay, so I take this to be W prime. Okay, so since its length is definitely less than the length of W, so which means that there exists a string of derivations, right? Uh, from this S to W prime, right? So from this S, right, I can generate 0 to the power n minus 1, 1 to the power n minus 1, 1. Okay. So this is by the inductive hypothesis. And then this string is the same as 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n, which means that from S also, I can generate 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n. And this completes the proof that any string in the language, right? Any string of the form 0 to the power n, 1 to the power n can be derived from beginning from the start symbol S. So, and that's why they will be present in the language of the grammar. So, any questions regarding this proof? Yeah. So in this case, so in that case, let's end the lecture today, and we'll meet again tomorrow. So thank you, everyone.